Hello and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create a Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your understanding of the Bible. The book of Revelation begins with 7 letters to 7 churches in 7 cities in the Roman province of Asia. You probably know this. The condition of each church and specific facts about each city are reflected in the content of each letter. This is likely not new to you either. What I aim to do this month in this episode of Create a Learning Site is a thorough check of the background information commonly shared to explain these letters, and hopefully uncover some new additional information that makes them even more amazing than they already are. I will not deal with every detail in each letter. I'm going to limit myself to extra biblical historical background information that's reflected in the letters and therefore helps us to understand them. There would be much more to say, for instance, on the Nicolaitans or the hidden manna than included here, but this would not be based on extra biblical information. My primary source is a book by Colin Heemer, published in 1986, The Letters to the 7 Churches of Asia in Their Local Setting. It's a modern classic on the subject, updating a book published in 1904 and therefore a little outdated. If you like the information presented here, the full text is available at wilrens.org, and you're free to take it and use it as a handout, for instance, in any way you like, especially if you're going to teach on the Book of Revelation. Head over to the website and download the text, wilrens.org. First is Ephesus. The identity of this city is not as sharply focused as that of the other ones, because it was the largest and most cosmopolitan of the 7. Within the Roman Empire, only Rome, Alexandria, and perhaps Antioch in Syria were larger. It makes sense, therefore, as a world-class city, that Ephesus has been called the City of Change. And the most significant identity marker of Ephesus was the renowned Artemis Temple, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. According to some reports, the original sanctuary had been a simple tree shrine dedicated to Artemis. The date palm was one of the symbols for Artemis and appears on numerous coins from the area. It may be that the later temple included an enclosed garden with fruit trees. The temple certainly functioned as an asylum where criminals could find refuge. Now, all of this would give added significance to the promise in this first letter given to the church of access to the tree of life in the paradise of God. Suffering seems to have had a special association with the city of Smyrna. For one, the word myrrh, which in Greek also is Smyrna, with its connotations of mourning and burial, was often connected with the city's name, even though the similarity is coincidental. Resurrection was another theme with a special link to Smyrna. While important in its early years, the city has lost its significance for a long time, several hundred years. Its subsequent rise, starting sometime after 300 BC, was sometimes interpreted as a resurrection and compared with the phoenix, that legendary bird rising from its ashes. The letter suggests that the Jewish community in Smyrna was particularly strong in its opposition to Christianity. This finds confirmation at the formal execution of Polycarp, a Christian leader from Smyrna, about 100 years later, by burning. Reportedly, the Jews of the city gathered wood for the burning even though it took place on a Sabbath. The victor's crown, shown in this illustration, was a common motif in the Roman province of Asia, but in Smyrna it carried additional significance. The city itself, with its location on top of a hill, has been described as a crown. One practice unique to Smyrna was to award a crown as a sign of honor to a deceased person. Now this gives special weight to the phrase crown of life in Revelation 2 verse 10, a contrast to a crown given at death that does nothing to mitigate that reality. In addition to this, there's evidence that earthly kings and emperors at times expected to be given a crown when visiting a city. Christ, on his return, will hand out rather than receive crowns. Pergamum is the location where, according to Revelation 2:13, Satan's throne is. This has been explained in different ways. Most importantly, 1. The city itself, seen from afar, looked like a throne. 2. The city housed a famous throne-like altar dedicated to Zeus. 3. Pergamum was renowned for its Asclepius temple. This god of healing, shown here, was often portrayed as a serpent or with a serpent. And 4. The city was the earliest and most important center for emperor worship in the East. It was also the seat of the Roman proconsul administrating the entire province and therefore the seat of Roman power. This latter explanation, I think, is most convincing. The first temple in Asia dedicated to a living emperor was approved by Augustus in 29 BC and built in Pergamum. It frequently appears on coins issued by the city, showing their pride in this temple. And in the book of Revelation, it is the emperor cult that will soon bring persecution on the church, and it's in Pergamum that the emperor cult had its strongest center. The letter to Pergamum also speaks of the Nicolaitans. I won't go into the details of this, except one thing. Eating food sacrificed to idols and practicing sexual immorality, Revelation 2:14, were both associated with various feasts and occasions that took place in the idolatrous temples in honor of a god. These were important social and business events. There was a cost to not participating, and therefore there was pressure to do so anyway. Apparently, the Nicolaitans had developed a theological rationalization to make participation acceptable. The hidden manna promised to the conqueror in Revelation 2:17 stands in contrast to these idolatrous meals. For the second part of the promise in verse 17, the white stone with a new name on it, many solutions have been proposed. Intended is probably a combination of allusions. First and foremost, the stone as a token of admission or membership, and a white pebble as a vote cast in a law case by a juror in favor of acquittal of the accused, as opposed to a black pebble as a vote for guilty. It's popular but unconvincing to understand the stone as a parallel to a pagan amulet inscribed with the secret name of a pagan god, something that existed at the time, because this is a bit too pagan and has too many magical connotations. Besides, the new name promised is most likely that of the individual receiving the stone, not a new name of God or Christ. Different from Revelation 3:12, where the name is explicitly the name of God and Jesus and the city, but this new name is the name of the believer. As Hemer puts it, it symbolizes the individual's entry into a new life, status, or personality. Hemer describes Thyatira as the least known, least important, and least remarkable of the cities. One thing we do know is that Thyatira had an unusually large number of influential trade guilds. These associations brought together workers of the same trade, usually under the patronage of a god. One way relationships within the guild were maintained was through meals in a temple. Commerce and religion went hand in hand. In Thyatira, it was the woman called Jezebel rather than the Nicolaitans who provided the excuse for Christians to participate. The upper city of Sardis was located on top of a hill with steep and crumbly sides, about 500 meters above the surrounding plain. It held a very strategic position, and the difficulty of taking this city had become somewhat proverbial. Alexander the Great was reportedly greatly impressed by the strength of the fortress, and nevertheless the city was captured by surprise twice in its history. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the Persian king Cyrus managed to enter the city by climbing up to an unguarded spot, and the spot was unguarded because it was considered unassailable. There's no evidence that the entire city was off guard and sound asleep at this time, as sometimes claimed. That would be an exaggeration. Cyrus, that was 546, and 214 BC, something similar happened. Antiochus III of Syria also took the city by exploiting an unguarded spot. So the image of an intruder coming at an unexpected hour, Revelation 3:3, would have evoked painful memories in Sardis. There are indications that the Jewish community in Sardis was large and unusually well integrated, and therefore comfortable, if somewhat compromised. This may find its counterpart in a comfortable but lifeless church. They did not provoke persecution, having soiled their garments, Revelation 3 verse 4, through compromise and adjustments. The white garments, mentioned in 3 verse 4, may be related to the local textile industry. Sardis was famous for its carpets and couch covers especially. And quite importantly, Romans would sometimes wear white garments on holidays and especially at victory parades, the so-called triumphs. Hemer points out that Sardis had experienced its share of shameful defeat, but there were those who would walk with Christ in his final triumph. In AD 17, Sardis and Philadelphia were hit by an earthquake called by one Roman author the greatest disaster in human memory. The area continued to be prone to earthquakes, and the emperor was generous with aid. In response, the city changed its name to Neo-Caesarea in honor of the emperor, and later under Vespasian it added his family name Flavia to the name of its city. This may explain the new name of Revelation 3 verse 12. However, in AD 92, Domitian ordered half the vineyards in the provinces to be cut down. This hit Philadelphia hard because its region depended on wine production more than any other in Asia Minor. Presumably, the addition to Philadelphia's name fell into disuse. And different from the Flavian emperors, Vespasian, Domitian, Christ is true or faithful. As the church, so the city likewise was one of little power. Hemer points out that games were important in Philadelphia, and therefore crowns were an apt symbol to use in exhortation. Now, the image of a pillar permanently placed in God's temple fits a location plagued by frequent earthquakes, where buildings were anything but permanent. Last and, well, least, Laodicea. It was located at an important crossroads, not far from Colossae and Hierapolis, also mentioned in the New Testament. The city was destroyed by a severe earthquake in AD 60. Different from Philadelphia, it declined aid from the emperor and financed its own rebuilding in a spirit of proud independence. This is one of the indications of how wealthy the city was. Laodicea functioned as a banking center. There was also a well-known medical school where a standard medical text on eye conditions was written, and it is often claimed that it produced an important eye salve, which is possible but not certain. The city certainly was known for its textile industry, especially for its black high-quality wool. Much has been written about this church being lukewarm. This is often understood as a lack of spiritual zeal, but in that case it is hard to see why not only hot, but also cold, presumably rejecting and negative, would be better. The background certainly lies in the local circumstances. Nearby, Hierapolis had hot springs with medicinal effects. Hemer calls it a health center. Colossae, higher up in the valley, enjoyed the pleasure of cool and pure water, being strategically located at a clean stream with clear water of good taste, a rarity in the area. But Laodicea did not have its own natural water supply. Water was brought by means of an aqueduct. Its citizens had to make do with lukewarm water. Water in the area generally had, and still has today, poor taste, though this would probably also have been true for Laodicea. Hemer therefore argues that the church was censured for its ineffectiveness rather than its half-heartedness. In other words, the church, like its water, was good for nothing. Revelation 3 verse 17 and 18 describes the church as poor, blind and naked, and lists corresponding offers of gold, white garments and eye salve. The advice to buy in verse 18, these things, fits well with the commercial nature of the city. With implied sarcasm, the items offered point to the pillars of the Laodicean economy as presented above. It shows that the church was as self-sufficient and independent, I need nothing, as the city in which it lived. In the year 40 BC, Asia was invaded by the Parthians, but Zeno and his son Polemo of Laodicea refused to surrender. As a reward for this victory, Polemo was elevated to royal status, and some of his descendants were kings as well. The family continued to be influential in Laodicea. Perhaps this adds depth to the promise of Christ to the one who conquers. I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. Well, that's it for this month. If you're interested in the text, head over to the website. Feel free to use it in any way, especially when teaching the book of Revelation. It's available at wilrens.org.
Show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience. The show will be starting in just a few moments.